All right, welcome to another edition of Bet On Lacrosse, our 50th episode. This started way back in, I believe, 2021 with Doug Greenberg and Dan Newbert being the hosts. I was the producer. It was a traditional podcast. We put out videos and stuff, and then we've evolved since then. Since then, we've started doing Twitter Spaces. It's a little bit easier for us to get together. More people can hop on. Don't have to rely on me having to edit it, and just goes out live. So happy to be bringing the 50th episode. I will hopefully be putting this out in podcast form too, if you tune in late for every reason. But if you're here listening right now, then you guys are in for another good episode. I got Brandon Biagi here and Brian Andrews, Bet On Lacrosse contributors. And we're going to talk all three lacrosse going on. College lacrosse, NLL, and then PLL obviously not going on right now, but free agency is going on. So some impact on the futures market there. But just to start, we'll start off with the NLL a little bit and talk NLL futures. Brian, we were talking a little bit before here. I'm kind of set with my futures, which means I'm, still looking at the futures week by week, but haven't really been as active in finding, value, I guess you could say. Still post the longest odds each week on my Twitter. So if you are looking to get in, I can tell you where you can get the best price. But let's talk a little bit of NLL futures. What are your thoughts on the market right now?
Well, I'm going to talk about one future because there's a couple price disparities on the market, which it's great to know the longest odds where they are, but it's also good to know which books are overvaluing or undervaluing which teams with respect to other books. But before I do, take what I say with a grain of salt, because my futures portfolio looks terrible right now. I was high on the Firewolves at the beginning of the season. Then I thought the Thunderbirds were undervalued, but they're hovering around 500. Can still make a playoff push, but a lot of teams have been disappointing that I've been really excited about in the beginning of the season. With that being said, though, the Roughnecks are on an absolute heater right now, and they have been for multiple weeks. It's not like a short-term thing. It's around 5 weeks or so. They've been upsetting a lot of teams. They've been scoring a lot of goals after kind of a cold streak offensively early in the season. Their defense is as stout as ever, and they're plus 220 on FanDuel, tied for the top spot with, I think, the Bandits, if I remember correctly, which makes sense because they're 10-2. But they're plus 1,000 on DraftKings, behind other teams that have worse records than them. I don't really know where the price is coming from on DraftKings. So I actually locked in a plus 1,000. So I could be jinxing them. Who knows? But I think the value is there for how well they're playing, and we're getting closer and closer to the playoffs. So if they maintain this level of play, it's going to be a great ticket to have to hedge against in the playoffs.
Yeah, and to that point, they're currently the second seed in the NLL, so it'd be pretty shocking for them to miss the playoffs, and that's kind of what you're looking for this time of year. Who's going to make the playoffs? Who's on the bubble? You can find some value on teams that are kind of on the edge, but you want to be careful because if they miss the playoffs, then that's dead. So they're one of the teams that looks like they're going to make the playoffs, barring a big collapse. And I want to give a shout out to Graham Pero, who's put together on NLLstats.com a almost like a I'm a big fan of the NFL playoff machine. Winding down towards the end of the season, I like figuring out what the potential outcomes are going to be. He did that for the NLL, so this is a good tool for futures bettors. If you are still looking to get in on a team, you can actually go down these coming weeks, fill out the results that you think are going to happen, and then have a good idea of what the playoff picture could have. And obviously you're predicting there, but it gives you a better idea than looking right now at what the standings are. Because right now, you got the Wings are in a playoff spot ahead of the Thunderbirds. But that could change. And then you also have the Rush in that fourth spot, in that wild card spot. We could see an East team sneak in there. We could see the Mammoth sneak in there. So just something to know that, you have this resource. Definitely recommend people use that if you're looking to get in futures. I'm pretty set right now. Just in terms of my portfolio, I have a bet on 9 different teams, and 8 of those teams, if they win, I'll win money. The 9th is the Mammoth, that I will lose money on, but they're right now on the outside looking in, so don't feel too bad about that one. If I really wanted to, secure myself, I probably could have gotten in. I think they're plus 4,000 at longest right now, so I could, make up for that if I really thought they were going to go for a run. I'm not too convinced. I do think they look better now that Ryan Lee's back in the lineup, so I do think they're a team that I might be looking to bet on a week-by-week basis coming up a little bit sooner, but for right now, I'm not interested in getting a future in on them. And then similar with Panther City, they're in that third spot right now. I just don't see them winning it all. And so, I'm just not willing to kind of diminish my returns on my other bets by placing a future on them. Rather, if they get past that first round, then start to talk about, how do I hedge with that in case they do make it to the championship. But right now, I'm not really interested in getting down on that much more than that. But yeah, I agree with you with Calgary. That's one that big disparity in the market. And that's why you always line shop, with some teams offering as low as 800, you said, out there. And then compared to you getting it at plus 1,000, I think there's some other numbers out there too. I forget what the longest was. It might even be 1,100, 1,200. So definitely line shop when looking at these futures. That's how I've been able to set myself up for success. If I was using the same book for all my bets, wouldn't be able to really build this portfolio. So definitely make sure you're getting the best number. Any thoughts to add to that, Brian, in terms of futures, or should we get into our NLL bets for this weekend?
I'm comfortable moving on. One thing before we get into our bets that I wanted to bring up is that since we haven't been on the air in about 2 weeks, one trend that I want to remind people of that we could have taken advantage of but sadly couldn't put out a show is there were a lot of repeat matchups in the past 2 weeks. And when teams play multiple times or 2 times in a row, repeat matchups, the score of the second game is almost 70% of the time there are fewer goals in the second game. And you could have taken advantage of that in the past 2 series for the Bandits and Thunderbirds, which had 19 goals in each game, and posting unders in both games. And then the other one was the Wings Riptide, who played 2 weekends in a row. The Wings had a game in between, but I'm still going to count it towards the trend because you're preparing for the same team twice in a short period of time. First game had like over 30 goals, and then the second game had 23. So it's a good trend to pay attention to, because if the first game's total goals scored is near or under the line posted for the subsequent week, you can really take advantage of plays for unders and get a high percentage win rate for your bets. So if you're not like a savvy NLL bettor, or you're not paying attention all the time, do yourself a favor and glance at the schedule and see if any of the matchups for this coming weekend happened in the previous weekend, and compare the score from last weekend to the total. The negative score differential on average is like -4 right now. So you can expect somewhere around like 2 fewer goals for a lot of these games in repeat matchups, and you can take advantage of bad lines that books are posting who are not paying attention to these types of trends. So since it happened twice in the past 2 weeks that we haven't been on air, I just want to remind people of that, because that's been a very successful betting strategy for us on the show, and I want everyone to benefit from that. But that's the one thing I wanted to touch on before we talk about our bets.
No, I agree with that. That's definitely a trend to look at. And I'll get us started. I didn't have this in the rundown, but with a bet that you can look at is another trend we like, and that's the short rest trend. We do have a matchup. We have 8 games this weekend, and since there's only 15 teams, one team is playing twice. That team is the Wings. So they're going to play Saturday morning and then have to play Rochester in Rochester Sunday. And that kind of buys into the short rest trend that we like to bet. And so my first bet that I'll throw out there is I like Rochester -1.5. It's -2.5 on a lot of books. You can get at Caesars -140 juice. So I like always, protecting myself, even if it means laying a little bit more juice, protecting myself with the better number. So yeah, I like Rochester -1.5 to cover. I just think, the Wings have been a streaky team. And last week, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, they did, play a Toronto team that was also on short rest. So, they both were on short rest there, so it didn't really fit our trend. And the Wings did end up winning. So it's not like these back-to-back games are really new to them, but I still think that's a tough ask playing a Rochester team that is looking to, it still seems as good as they were at the beginning of the season. I think the defense could play a little bit better. They got into a shootout last week with the Swarm, which obviously has some offensive weapons, but you would like to see a little bit better defense out of them compared to what we were used to seeing earlier in the season. But I'll go with that's my first bet of the week, -1.5 Rochester, a Sunday matchup. From that, Brian?
I'll piggyback right off you. I can't bring myself. I love the Rochester -1.5 play, but I can't bring myself to bet it because I'm a Wings fan. So I can't enjoy a game watching the Wings and having bet against them.
Edge your
yeah, exactly. But I do have a play for the earlier Wings game for the weekend where they're playing against the Swarm. So there's a little bit of a line disparity across books here. The total is 23.5 on FanDuel and 25.5 on DraftKings. And I'm eyeing this 23.5. The Swarm Wings games historically are kind of up and down. Swarm's offense is kind of on a tilt right now. They've posted in the past 3 weeks 20 and 18 goals in 2 of the 3 games. The other game was a little low scoring, but it was a repeat matchup. So I don't think it really affects their offensive proficiency. And the addition of Mitch Jones has kind of revived the Wings offense a little bit. So I think this has the chance to be a high transition match, a lot of back and forth, high efficiency game. And I think 23.5 is just a little bit too low. I see this game going over that line, and you can get that line better. If you want to fade me and you like the under, take the 25.5. I'm pretty sure that is on FanDuel, I said. So that's my first bet of the weekend.
Yeah, I like that. I probably won't be playing it just because I feel like the Wings have been a little bit streaky, and I have some other bets. But some other thing interesting to note, I believe I'm looking here. Yeah, so the last 6 matchups again between these two teams have been decided by 1 goal. So rationale there is if you're looking to bet a side on this game, you're better off taking the underdog, because if it's a 1-goal game, even if that team wins or loses, you're going to get that cover. So I don't know if I'm going to bet that. I feel like at this point, the Swarm were a team that middle of the season, beginning of the season, they looked really bad. And you kind of felt like, okay, this team is not great, but they're not as bad as their record. And that's kind of, been proven over time. They've played better. They've been more competitive. So now I feel like the juice has kind of been squeezed out of them as a good underdog pick. And I feel like, although I think they could upset the Wings, I'm just not ready to bet them at this shorter of a price on the money line or, at +1.5. I just still can't get as good a read on them, where I really liked them when they were getting those +2.5s, even the +3.5s, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the Wings are a team that, they're just too streaky for me to kind of predict and bet them on a side. One day they're, beating the Toronto Rock, then the next week they're losing to the Riptide by 3. So it's tough to kind of judge where they're at right now. They're a team that could make a playoff run. They're another team that could, lose the majority of their remaining games and miss the playoffs. So I'm probably not going to bet a side in this, but history suggests you should bet the Swarm +1.5 just based on the fact that these teams have had 1-goal games the past 6 weeks. Now, again, is this the game that breaks that trend? Probably, more than likely, because it's a crazy trend to begin with, the fact that last 6 matchups have been decided by 1 goal. But, crazier things have happened. So I think it's going to be a tight one regardless of the outcome. Do you want to move on to our 3.5 since I kind of teased that? Brian, I'll let you take it.
Yeah. I do want to correct myself real quick. The over 23.5 for the Wings game is on FanDuel, and the 25.5 is on DraftKings. So I have the over 23.5 on FanDuel. And also, just to add to the craziness of that series, I think at least 3 of the last 4 or something like that have all gone to OT between these teams. So, you're right. The history does tend towards the +1.5. But, how many times in a row can that happen? You shouldn't bet based off of that logic that I just presented, but I'm not betting aside either in that game.
We're due for a blowout, it feels like, at this point. Fucking it up right now. It's that's why I'm not betting that, because it's I would have liked to maybe bet that trend earlier, or just, again, it's a trend that's not really based on a lot of things, and it's more just the fact that these teams are, just play each other tight. So I expect a tight game, but I would only bet it if you feel really strongly about a certain team, as opposed to, hey, these games are always close. That's not really a strong reason to bet it. But it's something I had to throw out there as a trend guy. It is interesting.
But yeah, speaking of 3.5s, the Warriors on DraftKings are 3.5 dogs against the Seals. And we think that 3.5 is a big number for the Seals to have to cover, when over the past – they haven't covered a 3.5 against any opponent since late January when they were playing the Mammoth, whose offense was really weak at the time. You were saying earlier that Ryan Lee's back. It's giving them a huge boost offensively. But on top of that, the Warriors have started to really fight back in some of these games, and they've produced some high-scoring games. They've scored 14, 15 goals in a couple of the last 3 games. So I think it's a big task to ask the Seals to cover a huge number like a 3.5, and 3.5 is a number we don't normally see. So this is half of a fade the Seals' ability to really run away from teams, because we haven't seen that really all season. But it's also kind of a play the number, because 3.5s are so rarely seen, and they're covered pretty much unanimously by the dog from the lines that we've seen. But you might be able to correct me on that, Hutton. So Warriors plus 3.5 is the play.
Actually, this is pretty big. This is only the third 3.5 we've seen in NLL betting history, and it's the third this year. But the last two were the Swarm, actually. And it goes to show back to the trend where, playing teams back to back, it tends to be a tighter, lower scoring game. I mean, the Bandits double up the Swarm. Sportsbooks saw that and let's, make them 3.5-point underdogs. And they ended up covering that spread in the following game. They only lost by 2. Then the Swarm got that 3.5 again against Toronto. They only lost by 1 in that game. So obviously now we're looking at a different team. Vancouver, we can all agree, is a little bit worse than the Swarm, at least recently. Maybe not record-wise, but I'd say talent-wise. But yeah, I think this is it's just a good spot, because it's more like you look at Vancouver's past 2 weeks, they've won games despite being underdogs. And even though they lost to Calgary, they put up a fight. So I just think that, since Aaron Bold's gone in net, it's looked like a much more stable team. And they're playing, like we said, a Seals team. I think this is more of a fate of the Seals, the fact that they've only won by 4 or more twice this season in their wins. So, and these games, they did beat the Vancouver Warriors earlier this season by 5. So that's something to note, and which is probably being taken into account in this line. But like I said, Aaron Bold being in net, I think gives them a little bit more stability. Vancouver's looked better in recent weeks. The Seals, haven't put teams away. And I don't think it's necessarily like we're buying high on the Warriors and selling, low on the Seals, because I think, this number itself means the sportsbook still think pretty highly of the Seals. So I don't think Vancouver's going to win. I think they can keep it close, though. I think this backdoor cover is going to be, wide open throughout. So, yeah, I like betting the Warriors plus 3.5. It's a hold your nose play, but it's one that I think is a good play. I mean, you're already starting, pretty much with the Seals minus 3.5 here. So it's like Seals are going to have to really put up a lot of goals to cover this number, and they can do that, but they just really haven't shown it this year.
Yeah, totally agree with everything that you're saying. But we can move on to the last play, which I think is my favorite play of the weekend, even with a 3.5 on the board. And that's the Firewolves Riptide game. The total is set at 25.5 on DK. And I think that this line is egregiously high for these two teams, particularly the Firewolves. So I'm taking the under 25.5. And the reason is the Firewolves offense hasn't been producing. Their offensive, their goals for average is well below 10. And the last 3 or 4 weeks has been abysmal from the perspective of offensive production, scoring as low as 6 and 4 against different teams. And teams not with the craziest defenses on the year, too. Like the Wings, they were struggling to score against, and the Swarm blew them out 20-4. Like they're really hurting in the offensive end of the floor. But I also think that they're kind of upping their game again on the defensive end of the floor. They started getting blown out a little bit because of defensive deficiencies. Like their defensive strategy was getting picked apart, and they weren't making the adjustments. I think they're starting to do that. I think Dougie Jameson's getting a little bit of confidence back. And I think the only way this goes over is if the Riptide absolutely wipe the floor with the Firewolves. And I think they're going to make sure that that doesn't happen. So short of an absolute blowout, I think this goes under. So I think under is the high percentage play here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I could reiterate exactly what you said, but the only other thing I would really add to that, is the fact that the Riptide now have a new netminder, presumably in Cameron Dunkerley. He played really well last week and was able to hold the Wings to 10 goals. And that was a Wings offense that had looked pretty good the past couple weeks. So I think that's something that that's why it's important to kind of look at, these teams when you're betting, because the sports books aren't looking that closely at goaltenders, So we mentioned Aaron Bold as kind of like helping us, decide that angle with the Warriors. I think Cameron Dunkerley's presence for the Riptide should provide them a little bit more support defensively. And he gets to face a Firewolves offense, which is much worse than the Wings, in my opinion. So not that much worse, but definitely a significant drop in production that we've seen with the Firewolves. And I think Doug Jamieson looked good last week, so I'm hoping that, we see a little bit more of the Doug Jamieson we're used to this week than we have in weeks prior. So I like the under 25.5 in this one as well. That's our NLL plays, though. I know we went a little bit long there. We started a little bit late, too, because Twitter Spaces likes to act up every time we start. But let's go down to NCAA plays. I know we got some games coming up. We're trying to get this space done before Duke UNC. I don't think any of us have plays on that, more leans. I could be wrong, but that's one of the games that is coming up. And then Navy Hopkins is another one tonight. So we're not going to touch on Duke UNC since we don't have any plays on that. But Navy Hopkins, let's get right into that. I'll start with you, Brandon, since we haven't heard from you. But thoughts on this matchup?
So Navy Hopkins, I'll get right to it. I'm taking Navy and the points. It's 5.5. I believe there's a 5.5. Was it BetMGM? BetMGM has a 5.5. I actually took it at +5. I took it earlier in the week, and then the line moved away from me. But Navy, what we're looking at is 4 straight losses and 1 in 5 ATS since the first game. They were embarrassed last week at Colgate, and that was their first game without Skalniak. Dane Swanson was also not in. I'm not sure of his injury status right now. But Amplo was pretty upset in the interview afterwards. I think that Navy is going to want to come home here and give it everything we got just for pride. I mean, we lost 4 in a row and haven't even come close to covering what the books think you are. On the other hand, you got Johns Hopkins, who just pulled off a straight up an upset versus Syracuse in the Dome. Syracuse was favored in that. They got a win against St. Joe's before that, and then they beat Utah 12-4 right before that. So Johns Hopkins, there was a game against UVA in there too. But they're coming off a handful of covers here. I think they're probably feeling good after Syracuse, and I think Navy is probably pretty pissed off. And if it's a pride game, I'm taking the military academies every single time. So Navy +5. Let's keep it close. Show some pride in Annapolis. I think they got this to come within at least 5.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good game. I think that's too high probably of a spread. I am concerned about the injuries. Skalniak's injury concerns me. Obviously, we saw them get, demolished by Colgate last week. So I'm going to stay away from the side. But I know, Brian, me and you both have a play on this total. And I wrote an article on Action Network that you guys can check out. That's out now. But I'll let you take the floor, Brian, because I think we're pretty much in line with this one. And then I'll add anything if I think it needs it. But tell the people what we're betting on instead of picking a side in this one.
Yeah, we're taking the under 25.5, which you can find on MGM. So we're kind of betting correlated to what Brandon was talking about. For a lot of the same reasons. I'm a line shopper extraordinaire this week because the total on DraftKings is 23.5. So this episode is the line shop advice or example episode where you got to go and find the places where the books are inflating lines for arbitrary reasons. And I think the line is so high on MGM because of the results of a lot of the Navy games this year where they've actually hit the over on 25.5 in a surprising number of games. When I talk to you, if I brought up Navy or any of the military academies, I'm pretty sure we would all unanimously talk about low-scoring, gritty games. Navy's had a couple of games that have run back and forth with some teams. However, a lot of those games have not happened against teams of Hopkins' caliber. I was low on Hopkins this year. They are playing out this year. They look great, and they're controlling the pace of the game in a lot of these games and not letting the score get away from them. Their defense is controlling the pace, and I think that's what's going to happen in this game against Navy. So I'm seeing like a 13-8 kind of game here, and I think 25.5 in particular is just way too high. So I'm taking advantage of the higher number on MGM.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same logic with me. And actually, there's a FanDuel out there is offering a 22.5. So if you think we're way off and way wrong, go ahead, bet the over, but bet it over 22.5 and get that number. So I agree with you. And you mentioned pace. I mean, Hopkins plays at the 64th slowest pace according to Lacrosse Reference. So that's, there's only 75 teams in NCAA Division I men's lacrosse. So that's like really slow. And then, like I mentioned, the reason why I'm kind of staying away from the side is I am concerned about this Navy offense. They have Xavier Arline still, but Skalniak, was kind of the straw that stirred that drink from the midfield. So not having him is concerning to me. But I do think, this is a game that both teams get up for. This is a rivalry, one of the most historic rivalries. I grew up a Navy fan, so being on the Navy side, always rooting against Hopkins, hated when the band starts playing. So I think this is going to be a low-scoring affair. I think it's going to be a grinded-out match by both teams. And, for all the reasons you said, Brian, I like it to go under 25.5. And if those are correlated at all, hopefully Brandon will win his bets and we'll win ours. So that's our thoughts on the Friday night matchup to kick off rivalry weekend. Let's move on now to an Ivy League matchup. We're getting into Ivy League play, and the jury's out on whether the Ivy League is legit this year or not, but we get to see some inner Ivy League competition now between Yale and Cornell. Brandon, talk to me a little bit about this matchup. What are you eyeing on this one?
Yeah, I'm not putting my money down on this one, but Cornell last week, they just got punched in the mouth by the Penn State freight train that nobody can slow down. But this game, this will tell us a lot about the character of Cornell. Like, will they rebound and play Yale tight? If they do, I'd be interested in putting a future on them. I think they could go far. If they come out here and fold, then that doesn't look as good for them. I think I would lean Cornell to bounce back. I think these are the two class of the Ivy League, but I don't have any money on it.
What about you, Brian?
I think this game is going to be probably the game of the week for me to watch, because this is like a tale of two different teams. Yale has yet to score less than 10 goals all season, and Cornell has only let up more than 10 once. So I think this game is going to come down to Cornell's defense and whether or not they can control Yale's offense. If Cornell can control the pace of the game, then I think Cornell has a really good chance of winning, or at least keeping it tight. But for that reason, like it's such a coin flip who's going to control the game, I think. Because if Cornell's close defense just comes out and they just can't win their matchups that day, they're just not feeling it for whatever reason, I think Yale runs away with it. So I'm not putting any money down, but I think it's going to be the most interesting game to watch to see who kind of puts their foot on the pedal and keeps it there the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, it's definitely a game that both teams are going to be strategically trying to control the momentum, and it's going to be back and forth. But I was just very surprised that Cornell wasn't favored in this one. I think it would be close, but I would have personally flipped the line, and I may be off base with that. But I feel like this is a good spot to back Cornell off of a loss, a 10-6 loss that wasn't great against a Penn State team, but Penn State has been good this year. They beat Yale. So I don't know. I feel like this game is going to be tight. But that's why I just feel like it's a sell high on Yale, who just beat Denver team, and Denver played them well. But I'm going Cornell here, plus 1.5 or plus 105 on the money line. I considered the plus 1.5, but I don't like laying that much juice when I expect the team to win. So rather than get that, goal insurance, I'm just going to ride them on the money line here on Caesars plus 105. Like it a little bit less at minus 110, which is where it's at a lot of books because it's essentially a pick 'em. But to me, Cornell is the better team than Yale. It's an Ivy League matchup. It's going to be a close one, but that's where I'm betting. It's not one of my best bets, that's for sure. So if people are like you guys and staying off, then no worries. I don't blame you for that, but it's one where I feel like it's a good spot to back Cornell because I don't think we're going to get them as an underdog much this season. So that's where I'm backing the Big Red in this one. So that's my thoughts on that game. That's our thoughts on that one. UVA Maryland's another one where people are probably staying away, but I think I learned my lesson last year with Maryland and UVA were both playing each other. It was a 1.5 point spread. And I'm like, I'm taking the underdog in this. This is going to be a tight matchup. Give me UVA plus 1.5. They got blown out, and this is another spot where I feel like you could kind of make the same logic from, reverse point of view with, hey, Maryland's going to play UVA tight. It's 2.5 at most books. You could have gotten 1.5 at BetMGM. They've taken it down now. So 2 is the number on some books, 2.5 on others. but I just feel like UVA's offense is too good. Maryland hasn't really shown me much. I've liked backing Maryland as a short favorite in a lot of games against inferior opponents, but against an opponent like UVA that's shown to be in a different class, I like UVA -1.5, -2, whatever you can get. The thought process too with that is UVA hasn't been good at covering the spread this year, which is why I think we're getting this line. But the spreads that they've been given are, between like 3.5 and 7.5. Now they're playing a Maryland team that I think they're, better than and can, I think, put up a lot of points on. I like UVA -1.5, -2. So I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on this one?
Dude, I was waiting for this line to come out because it couldn't be big enough. I would be taking UVA alt ladders all the way up to -7, 8.5, something like that. So last year when these teams met, it was kind of like a question, like who was better? Is it UVA? Is it Maryland? And Maryland just looked like the better team. Also, they had those heartbreaking losses to UVA coming into this. They had something to prove. They go to that, were they at Audi Field?
Yeah, Audi Field.
Yeah, they were at Audi Field. And then they were on national TV, and they kicked the shit out of Virginia, which was actually I just looked on my list. I keep margins of my bets to determine how close or far I am. That was the biggest margin of victory I had on a bet last season. So Maryland kicked the shit out of them. Then they kicked the shit out of them again. And then they lose all their offensive pieces. And now Virginia gets a home game against them. This is double revenge after an embarrassing showing by UVA the last 2 years. They are going to run it up. I don't trust Nunes in goal. I also don't trust the Maryland offense fully. So I think give me UVA at whatever line you can find in that. That's what I'm doing. I waited. As soon as that came out, -2, I smashed it.
Yeah, I think this is, UVA's game. What does concern me is Maryland's goalie. The name's escaping me. The rookie they started last week did look pretty good. Compared to names escaping me too. The Binghamton guy that played against Syracuse, who didn't look bad, but obviously wasn't McEnany capable caliber. So that is the one thing that makes me a little concerned. Like I don't know if I would play this at anything better than -2, 2.5, just because the fact that Weirman at the face-off stripe could, kind of give them a little bit more of a possession advantage. So that's the one concern here where I'm not like, it's not a slam dunk pick for me. But like you said, UVA's offense is so elite this year. They're just putting up points and like you said, they're not going to let up against Maryland. Like they got the shit kicked out of them last year. Like they're not going to take their foot off the gas like they've done with some of these other teams. Like we saw Harvard with that amazing backdoor cover. UVA is not going to do that against Maryland. That's just not going to happen. And although, they're in different conferences now, I still feel like that ACC rivalry, the blood from that is still like fresh, just because these teams tend to play each other in the playoffs so often. And even though it's technically not an ACC matchup, it still feels like one to me. So yeah, I like UVA in this one. Surprised the spread was this short. And maybe I'll be wrong. We'll see. We'll find out. Maryland could surprise us. Because I do think Maryland is a team that, if they lose this game, I'm probably going to try and be looking to play them next week. I forget who their opponent is the following week, but I like doing that, the little zigzag. But for this weekend, it's UVA for me. Brian, you staying away from this one?
I do have on my card that I wasn't going to talk about in this episode. I have the under 28.5, which I think is on FanDuel. And after Brandon's speech, I would have taken an over 40.5. PLL sticks this line. So I wouldn't follow my play there because I love everything that you guys had to say about it. And I'm very Virginia heavy. I'm definitely, historically speaking, I'm definitely a Virginia fan. I grew up being a fan of them, and I want them to win this revenge game. But yeah, I love everything that all the energy Brandon brought on that monologue there. That was great. So don't tail my under. I was just playing the number.
And Brandon's telling me now that Maryland's playing Penn State. So maybe I have to reassess that, not blindly play Maryland. I don't know. Me personally, Like I have to see a letdown from Penn State before I start fading them just a little bit because they look legit. What are your thoughts, Brandon? If we want to do a look ahead line real quick.
We're on a Zoom here. Hutton seeing me shake my head. No, I would love to see Penn State win another one and then run into an angry Maryland team. That would be good. Not for any, like, I don't like one team more than the other. I would just love to see that dynamic.
Yeah, and that's, those are the spots you look for. I mean, we talked about it a little bit in the NLL, like the buy low, sell high spots. So we'll see. We'll see what that line is when it comes out next week, and we'll see what the result is, both these teams' matchups this weekend. But let's go into best bets. So, Brandon, I'll start with you. Just lay it out. What other bets that we haven't talked about? What are you on? Give us the quick Spark Notes versions of why you like these plays.
Yeah, sure. I have three. One that Brian and I are both on, and Brian, you can add to this. We both took Hampton plus 15.5. I took it yesterday. They're playing Stony Brook. So Stony Brook comes off 3 non-covers and 2 straight-up losses to play St. John's this week. That game was supposed to be on Tuesday. It got delayed because of weather and moved to Wednesday. So basically, Stony Brook comes home off a cold streak to play St. John's, who doesn't have a win yet. That was their get-right game. That was, we are gonna get right against St. John's here. That was Wednesday. Now they turn around Saturday, and they have to go south to Hampton. So we have an extra short week. They got their get-right game in. I'm hoping that Stony Brook gets out to a lead. Maybe they sit down Palinetti and some of these other guys that are prime players here. Maybe try some new sets, kind of use it as a rest week that, we're going to beat Hampton. But Hampton's a group of guys that they ain't ever going to give up. So 15.5 is a huge backdoor for that off of Stony Brook coming off of a short week. So love them to cover that. Brian, what were your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I saw kind of caveman this one. I saw a big number and pressed the button. But partially it's because we did that with the 18.5 for High Point. And even though High Point is like super offensive and doesn't have a lot of I shouldn't say doesn't have a lot of defense, but they're not known for their defensive proficiency. They're known because they can score a lot and score fast. And I still took the 18.5 and it covered by the hook. Stony Brook's offense has been much more volatile. Some games they run away with it. Some games they can't really seem to find the net. I just think 15.5 leaves us open for a backdoor cover all day. Like you're saying, Stony Brook might bring out the 2s and 3s late in the game, play some new sets, bring out the works, and it leaves Hampton wide open for a backdoor cover late in the game. So I just think the number's too big to ignore, and we've had success with it in the past. And I honestly, I only threw a half unit on it, and I wouldn't even be mad if it didn't hit because you can't just miss out on something like this, I don't think.
Yeah, I'd be mad or else I wouldn't have put my money on it. But the next one I have, let's think of that same game dynamic with the Johnnies and Stony Brook. They were on that short week where the game gets pushed back. St. John's gets St. Joe's next. The battle of SJU. Who the real SJU? I can tell you as a St. Joe's alum, we think we're the real SJU. When we see SJU labeled as St. John somewhere, I'm always like, the fuck is that? So St. Joe's minus 8.5. They're also on an L3 right now. Close one to Hopkins, 1-goal game. Overtime loss to UPenn. Embarrassment to Drexel. They need a get-right game. The look ahead for St. Joe's is Duke. Think whatever you want. I don't know if those guys are in the locker room being like, yeah, we're going to get one at St. John's, then we're going to get one against Duke. I'm sorry. I love St. Joe's, but I don't think that's happening. I think they have this on the calendar as we got to fucking get one right now. And I think 8.5, I think they can cover that against St. John's on the road. I'm sorry, Johnny's. First win is not coming now. St. Joe's is going to be all over them. So I'm taking St. Joe's minus 8.5. The real SJU. Quote, credit me. The last one I have is Jacksonville minus 3.5. They're minus 110 at Bobby Moe. Now, Bobby Moe is on a 2-game losing streak, but this is Jacksonville's only important game in the schedule spot. So here's what we have. Beginning of mid-February, they played at High Point. They won by 2. Then they had UMass Lowell, St. John's, Robert Morris right now, circle that. Then I get Mercer and Cleveland State, even though Cleveland State might be onto something this year. But in that spot, you got a tight one against High Point. You got 2 games you know you're going to blow them out. You got Bobby Moe, and then 2 more you know you're going to blow them out. This is the game they care about all month. So I think they have this one circled. We saw Bobby Moe drop one at home against Hobart. I wouldn't read too much into the home-away dynamic with how much Jacksonville is going to be focused on this. So I like Jacksonville minus 3.5.
I love that, dude. I might hammer that too. Fade Bobby Moe a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I like their team, but this is more of a play on Jacksonville than a fade of Bobby Moe for me.
That's fair. I mean, we can get right into mine. I only have one more after the Hopkins Navy under 25.5, which I explained earlier. This one's a little bit of a Pepto play for me, as Dan Newbert would say, but I'm also going to talk about a High Point dog. I'm looking at Queens plus 11.5 against Air Force, which is minus 115. So this is going to be kind of a hold your nose one. But I'm playing this big number specifically because I already said it earlier, but the military academy teams are not known for their high-paced offenses. And they're playing Queens, who's a new program, and I was really down on them at the beginning. I was like, it's going to be like Hampton, blah, blah, blah. And they've been playing teams surprisingly close with the exception of their last game. And I forget who they played last game. It might have actually been High Point, and they got crushed. But they've been keeping – and High Point's a team that I've already explained has like a super high-paced offense. So you kind of expected them to get out and ahead of Queens early. Air Force might have a little bit more trouble doing that. But even if they do, then like we were talking about with Hampton, they try new sets, they get the 2s and 3s in, they get going. Queens has an opportunity to backdoor cover. 11.5 is also a large number in lacrosse to have to cover. If Queens can get 9 goals in, Air Force has to put in 21 to cover this number. So I'm liking the big numbers, and I think the books are overvaluing some teams that have not shown that they have the offensive proficiencies that the books think that they have. So I'm fading the offensive efficiency and pace of Air Force, not necessarily the talent. I think clearly Air Force is going to win. 11.5 is just a huge number. So it's another one that I really can't ignore, just like the 15.5 personally. And that's it for me. Those are my 2 big college plays for the weekend. But I'm probably going to get on Jacksonville minus 3.5, probably.
Yeah, I'm on that Jacksonville play now too. I don't really have a best bet because I kind of went through the 2 I like are UVA minus 1.5, which might be off the board. So I still like UVA minus 2, and then this Navy Hopkins under. But my EMO extra money opportunity, which we'll go to, is I like Lehigh on the money line. I like them to win outright against Army. Both teams' schedules of late haven't been like too impressive. But I do think that you look at Army, they get that big win over Rutgers, and then they play, a cupcake schedule for the past 4 games. And then you look at Lehigh, and Lehigh as well as kind of, had some games against some weaker opponents, Binghamton, Holy Cross, not too great. Navy, jury's out on them. They did beat Navy. And they played Cornell pretty tight. They lost 12-5, so it's not, it wasn't like it wasn't a huge blowout. They weren't super close in that game, but I feel like that was still a good, game for them against a tough Cornell team. And I just think it comes down to the fact that I think Lehigh is going to have the possession advantage. I think this game could look a lot like the UMass Army game in week 1, where, Army, hung in there, but they really struggled to develop a rhythm. Will Coletti is a great face-off guy. I mean, he's right now, I think, in terms of face-off percentage in the top 5. And Mike Sisselberger's not too far behind him. But if you look at this matchup last year, Sisselberger went 68% against Coletti. So I just think Sisselberger's going to be able to dominate again, at least enough to give Lehigh a possession advantage. I got Lehigh plus 2.5 and then them on the money line at plus 175. It's now moved to 1.5. But the money line price is still plus 165 on DraftKings. So I suggest just jumping on them on the money line to win outright. You could also at even money get them plus 1.5 if you want on Caesars. But, if you like them that much, I just feel like the money line is the play to make here. And I'm taking Lehigh outright against Army, which pains me, as an Army guy. But I just don't think Army is as legit as, the record kind of makes them seem. So going Lehigh outright in this one. What about you guys? What are your guys' extra money opportunities this weekend?
Yeah, I had Lehigh on my list, and I think you just talked me into it. But this is quite the vicious cycle of just talking each other into spending money on these games. But the extra money opportunity I have is VMI. So they are playing Siena at home. Siena's off of 3 straight covers, and they won 2 of those. Now they travel down to Virginia, where VMI is on a 3-game losing skid. But if you look at the stats here, VMI ranks higher in offensive efficiency, face-off percentage, save percentage, and they're about the same in defensive efficiency. So you're telling me we got teams that VMI has better statistics than Siena. They're at home. They're pissed off on an L3, and you got Siena, who's been overachieving, meaning covering spreads recently. I think VMI on the money line here. I think they put one in the win column here, and VMI slowly creeping up to like one of the teams I bet on like almost every week. I don't know why, but I just love their lines every week. I know Brian likes it too. He's like the maestro of the mid-major.
Yeah, but at the same time, I have stopped betting on VMI games because after the first week I was like, VMI could be a little bit of a wagon, and then they go to like 2 OT against Queens, and then they didn't cover, or they were dogs, like big dogs, and then they didn't cover against teams they really should have covered against. And I probably have lost like triple what I won on the first EMO of the season for me betting on them. So I've like sworn to never bet on them again, at least for this year.
Well, now hopefully it works out better for me. But
yeah,
the other,
I would say I love major dives that you guys do. It's not really for me most of the time, but there's some gems that you guys have pulled out this year so far.
Yeah, we're looking for angles. The other thing that I'm going to be doing, I haven't figured out how I'm going to puzzle piece these, but I have a few pieces for parlays, like just money lines that I like that I wouldn't necessarily take the spread. I'll go through them quick. Utah, they're 1-4. They need a win bad. They're home against Bellarmine, who is overperforming. Bellarmine, where did they come from? 5-1. I think Utah really, really needs to win this game. Loyola, I think the lines are a little messed up from those first 2 games that they played. Johns Hopkins and Maryland. No, not Hopkins. It was Maryland, and who else did they play right in the beginning?
Hopkins. Yeah, Hopkins was one.
Okay, yeah. So they had 2 important ranked wins, and then they haven't covered a spread since. And so I think the lines are a little messed up there. I don't know that I'd take 4.5, but Bucknell might have emptied the tank last week against BU, coming within a couple goals. So I don't know if Bucknell can turn around and do it again. I also don't know how much I want to lay on Loyola. Merrimack, they are at home against Binghamton. I just think they're the better team. Binghamton has a face-off advantage, but I just think that Merrimack is the better team. This is the one that I don't have as much of schedule dynamic or statistical insight, but I just think I know that Merrimack has a 14th ranked defense. So hopefully, if there's only one good unit of all these teams, and it's Merrimack. So I would take them there. Next one, Towson. They were playing Drexel. Drexel covered for the first time ever this season against St. Joe's, where they won outright. Breaks my heart. But so this line might be a little bit of a reaction to that. It's Towson minus 2.5. The thing that pushes me away is this series hasn't had a 3-goal game since early 2019. So I don't know that I want to pick for it to happen now. That's why I like them on the money line. Hobart is the last one. They are playing Providence. Providence is off of 2 straight-up wins as dogs. So Providence is rolling right now. Hobart has flip-flops every single week. They either win and cover, or they lose and they don't cover. And if we go in the flip-flop, they're due to win and cover. So maybe some regression from Providence. And we continue with the coin flip for Hobart. I think they pick one up. I don't want to lay 2 for them. So that's five teams there. Utah, Loyola, Merrimack, Towson, Hobart. If you put them all together, you get plus 300. I am way too risk averse for that. I will probably put, 2 here, a few there, that type of thing, with my favorite being Utah. So if another idea I just had, like right this second, if you don't love UVA as much as I love them, maybe you take UVA on the money line and you stick it with Utah. You get some solid odds. I don't know what they are, but definitely use that Utah as a parlay piece. I think they get there. And so that's it. I'll put it on Twitter probably tomorrow morning, whatever I land on with the parlay puzzle. But that's what I got for this week.
You could round robin them too. I don't usually round robin things, but that's another angle that you could take with these, definitely. But yeah, those are our thoughts on NCAA. Real quick for PLL before we wrap up and get everyone out of here so they can watch Duke UNC. PLL future odds have moved a little bit in relation to free agency. Some have, some haven't. So you can go to my Twitter and you can see I post the longest odds for each team. Whipsnakes are, the favorites with plus 475. Water Dogs are plus 550 on Barstool. Atlas are plus 575 on Caesars. Archers are plus 650 on DraftKings and FanDuel. Chaos are plus 800 on BetMGM and DraftKings. And then Chrome, Redwoods, and Cannons are on Caesars. You can get Chrome at plus 800, Redwoods plus 1200, Cannons plus 1500. Now, I tell people that because it really pays to line shop for these odds, particularly now, because BetMGM, DraftKings, and FanDuel have reacted and moved their odds based on free agency, with the Archers being the notable example where the Archers are now longer, despite, me personally thinking they've actually made upgrades in free agency. They lost a lot of pieces, but they filled those pieces with younger or equally talented caliber players. And then you got Barstool, Bet365, and Caesars did not move these odds. So, you're able to kind of get your pick of the litter depending on what teams you like. Personally, I had already gotten in on the Cannons and Redwoods in case that the Caesars had moved. Also decided to bet Chrome at plus 800, 8-1 there. And then I like the Archers just because of what the moves they made. So it may sound like, I'm, playing a lot of different sides, but I've done that with the NLL. I did that last year with the PLL, and that's kind of my approach right now. So don't have to follow that approach, but definitely be cognizant of where the best number is on these sports books and know, that some are moving their odds right now, some haven't. So for the ones that haven't moved their odds yet, if you like those numbers and you feel like that those teams have made significant improvements in free agency, hop on them now. So just a thought, parting shot there for PLL. We appreciate everybody listening. Brandon and Brian, thank you guys for joining me. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Bet On Lacrosse, our 50th episode. We'll be back. I don't know if it'll be next week, but we'll be continuing to hop in and getting to work with a lot of these games. So definitely continue to tune in, and we appreciate you guys listening.